It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large, 60 minutes of smart talk radio featuring guests from all walks of life in conversation with your host, Warner Lewis. So sit back and lend us your ears for the next hour. Now here with today's first guest is the host of Lewis at Large, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck. And of course, as always, Smart Talk Radio is certainly in your future, and this segment will certainly be no exception. An interesting subject, an important one, the First Amendment of the Constitution. Not a brand new work, but a recent work by Floyd Abrams called The Soul of the First Amendment. Floyd Abrams is senior counsel in the New York law firm of Cahill, Gordon, and Rundell, LLP. He's also an adjunct professor at New York University School of Law, author of numerous publications, also has frequently argued in front of the Supreme Court in First Amendment cases ranging from the Pentagon Papers to Citizens United, et cetera, et cetera. He's considered America's preeminent authority on the First Amendment. Very pleased to have him. Mr. Abrams, Floyd, how are you, my friend?
I'm just fine. Thanks for having me here.
Well, it must be a labor of love for you and also one of tremendous concern, this thing we call the First Amendment. What was the real motivation for you here in writing The Soul of the First Amendment?
Well, it has seemed to me for some time that we don't, as a country and as a people, appreciate how much more in the way of sort of free speech, free expression rights we have than other democratic countries. So a good part of my book is a sort of comparison, not of the U.S. and Russia, but the U.S. and Canada, the U.S. and England, in terms of some of the different sorts of cases that come up there, which are decided in ways just very differently and much less protectively than we would do about free speech. I mean, we protect some awful speech that we think we have to protect in order to protect good speech. And a lot of other countries, a lot of other democratic countries, have much more narrow view of just what free speech means.
Where are we? Because undoubtedly, and you would know this better than anyone, that the country seems to swing like a pendulum back and forth in terms of its vigilance in protecting what it considers free speech. And there are times where maybe we don't address it maybe as directly and protect it as strongly as we should. Where would you say in a timeline, where are we now in terms of our appreciation of free speech and the First Amendment and our desire and abilities to keep it as such?
Well, really good questions. I'm afraid that we don't appreciate it at all as much as we should, and we're not as educated. And I don't mean school educated. I just mean the public at large doesn't very often seem to get the essentiality of having really broad sort of sweeping protection for free speech, even when it's painful to us. Burning an American flag, for example. The Supreme Court has said that's protected. That's a very unpopular opinion for reasons we can understand in terms of the pain it inflicts on patriotic, devoted, engaged Americans. But we protect it because it is a sort of speech. It is a sort of a way of expressing dissent. And so whether we like it or not, and that's a good part of what the First Amendment is about, whether we like it, whether we agree with it, even whether we think it may do a level of harm, but, not so clear just what the harm is sometimes, that we protect the speech. And so I don't think that there's enough of an understanding of the degree to which we protect speech and the reasons that we protect speech. And that's really what set me to try to write a very short, 130-page book which is not a scholarly book, but which is an effort to try to set forth the sort of what I guess the cliche would be American exceptionalism, how different in this area we really are, and how important it is that we understand it.
Where it is sort of, and again, sort of layered into that, the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, but freedom of religion in particular as it relates to things such as bans on people immigrating here from Muslim countries, etc. How does that all weave itself? Does it make the picture a lot more complicated, or does it make it even clearer in your mind what can be, what should and should not be done?
I mean, we should bear in mind that the first freedom listed in the First Amendment is religion. I mean, when it says Congress shall make no law, which are the first words of the First Amendment, no law abridging, it then goes into 4 freedoms, but the first is religion, and then speech, and then press, and then assembly. A ban, and let's not get to the issue of the current ban, et cetera. But if this is viewed, if we have a ban on Muslims coming to America, I don't think any member of the Supreme Court, liberal or conservative, would say that can be constitutional, because we're not allowed, because of the First Amendment, to make decisions of that sort based on religion. We can base it on a lot of things, most important of all, that somebody's likely to commit an act of violence or harm the country. But a sort of generalized a take on the situation by saying, well, we're not going to have any Muslims coming anymore, is something which I really don't think anyone on this Supreme Court would buy into. So that's why it's so important when they decide cases about immigration right now, for example, that they're deciding whether it is a ban based on religion, rather than if it is a ban, is it unconstitutional? Because I think it would be accepted across the board, maybe not by everyone in the public, indeed surely not by everyone in the public, but I think the Supreme Court and any Supreme Court would unanimously say, look, if we're going to keep people out because of their religion, that's unconstitutional.
You just joined us. Yours truly, Warner Lewis, from the flight deck, as always, of Lewis at Large Radio, talking to Floyd Abrams, one of America's preeminent authorities on the First Amendment. He is senior counsel at the New York law firm of Cahill, Gordon, and Rindell. He's also an adjunct professor at New York University School of Law and has argued frequently in front of the Supreme Court in cases ranging from the Pentagon Papers to Citizens United. You've also seen him on numerous national television networks as well. Floyd, what about let's talk about what speech, be as specific as you can, is not allowed or is not tolerated and would not pass court muster?
Sure. Well, first we have some categories which we simply define as not speech. For example, spying. Sure, it involves words. Perjury, lying in court, involves words. What our law says is, that's not what we mean. That's just not what we're talking about when we talk about freedom of speech. Nor do we protect speech which is direct incitement to violent conduct. Now, we're very careful about how we define that, and we define it very narrowly, much more narrowly than most democratic countries do. But if someone's giving a speech advocating violence, and it's likely to occur and soon, short range, not long range, it's not protected by the First Amendment. We also have libel law. It's more protective than any other country in the world, protective of speech. the other way to say that. It's harder to win a libel case when you sue a newspaper here than anywhere else in the world. But if you say something or print something that's not true, and if it's about a public person, president, police chief, head of a big company, head of a union, and it's not true, or you sort of suspect it's not true, you can still have to pay a lot of money. We have these bodies of law. We have privacy law, but again, much less than a lot of other countries. One country I compared us to recently was Finland, because Finland happens to be a very protective country about free speech. But when a prime minister of Finland just a few years ago had an affair with a woman while he was prime minister, and she wound up writing a book about it, he went to court, and he got a court order barring her from including in her book anything about his children or anything about their intimate relationship. That would be really sort of unthinkable here, not because those areas are not sensitive areas, but because we would say, look, if you're prime minister or here president, and somebody writes a book about your behavior, and in effect what sort of person you are, we don't believe in limiting it or making it making you pay money for saying it. In this case, the woman that wrote the book had to pay money, and the book could not be sold so long as it had those two topics discussed in it. And I cite Finland again because it is a very free speech oriented place. I mean, in 1776, when Thomas Jefferson was drafting our Declaration of Independence, Finland already had a Freedom of Information Act. So that's a country that has treasured it through the years. They just have a different view than we do of sort of how much protection to afford, and taking it case by case with few exceptions. Our law provides at least as much and generally more protection than any place else.
Kind of going back to our discussion earlier about sort of the attitude or the environment that the First Amendment finds itself in from time to time. Sometimes it depends maybe on who's in the White House, maybe not at all. But have there been times where you thought we are in very, very dangerous territory here of not necessarily suppressing, but the First Amendment is either A, being abused, or B, not being taken into consideration where it should be? Is there a particular period in time over, let's just say, the last decade or so where you felt concerned about it? Is it always at risk? I guess in some ways it's always at risk.
I'm sorry, go on.
Well, I would think in some ways it's always at risk, but tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's always at risk. I think in some respects it's more at risk now than it's been for a number of years. I mean, look, we've had some very rough times throughout American history. We had a Sedition Act under John Adams, which put journalists in jail for writing what were said to be false things about the president. We put abolitionists in jail in many states in the country before the Civil War, and in McCarthyism time in the 1950s here, a lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people wound up in jail who wouldn't do or say certain things. We're not in that sort of period now, and we haven't been, I'm glad to say, for some years. I do think some of the things that President Trump has said he'd like to do would be severe threats to the First Amendment. He wants to change the libel law. He said journalists shouldn't be able to use confidential sources, and a number of other things. But for the most part, those are things he has talked about, but he's not asked for new legislation to deal with. Probably the most troubling thing right now, and for the past year anyway, I'd say, has been the level of anger, the forcefulness of a lot of people aimed at the press, treating it as, well, the president used the word, an enemy of the people. I mean, he has First Amendment rights too, and people that think the press is misbehaving or not doing its job right have every right to speak out, and it's a legal right as well as a sort of a political right. But I am concerned about the sort of level of, sometimes it seems like, daily attacks on the press, even when it doesn't get something wrong, even when what it's doing is criticizing. And I think that's something we have to watch out for.
What about, I note in the book, you talk a little bit about how Europe maybe treats certain things differently than the United States, specifically, for example, political campaigns. If I wanted to donate $100 million to a political candidate, why should I be allowed to do that? Does that fall under freedom of speech and freedom of association?
What's now clear is that, is that you could spend it supporting a candidate. We distinguish as a legal matter between your right to spend your money, as much money as you want, supporting a candidate, and the right to contribute it, to give it to the candidate or to the campaign. We do have limits on how much you can give to campaigns. We don't have limits on how much you can spend and how you spend it, so long as you don't give it to the campaign. It does raise a First Amendment issue to say that even contributions can be limited in amount. The theory of that is that contributions are on the edge, or sort of like, or have the potential to have the same bad effects as bribery. If you give a guy enough money, he's going to do what you want him to do. My own reaction is that even in that area, we really have to be careful about limiting the speech that contributions as well as expenditures lead to. There's nothing we protect more than political speech, and there's nothing we should protect more in the speech area than speech about who to vote for, who to elect. And so it raises really serious issues when we say, yes, but if you contribute a certain amount of money, you'll be over the line. I'd add to that I think it's very important that we know who is contributing and who is spending money over certain amounts. And I think the Supreme Court has been correct in saying that the states and the federal government have the authority to require the disclosure of who's talking. And who's talking, as it were, as a result of spending their money supporting a candidate or contributing to a candidate.
Floyd, you'd mentioned off the air that you're coming to the Midwest in the near future to speak to maybe up to 1,000 high school kids about the First Amendment and doing some other things. I'm curious as to, from your vantage point, having argued in front of the Supreme Court, the legal work that you've done as you travel around the country, are our young people, are they aware of the First Amendment and its value? And if not, what do we need to do about it?
Yeah. Well, I don't think they're aware enough about it, and I think they're less aware of it now than at other times in our history. One easy way to say it is that in a lot of places in the country, certainly where I live in New York, we just don't teach civics anymore. We don't teach kids before they get to college, and maybe in high school or even in junior high school or 7th, 8th, 9th grade, almost anything about the sort of government we have, about the Constitution we have, and about the First Amendment that we have. And I think that's been a real loss. And I think we see some of the consequences of that on some college campuses, where some kids entirely wrongfully, in my view, have sort of come to the view that if they disagree enough with what someone is going to say who's invited to a campus, that they can go beyond protesting, go beyond even heckling, but really go down the road to suppressing, in effect, preventing the speech from occurring. And so I think it's really important that we teach our kids, and it doesn't have to be in the greatest detail, but for them to at least have a broad sense of what living in a democratically rooted country means, about what sort of government we have and what sort of freedoms we have, and I would add, and should be proud of.
Well, as we start to wind down here a little bit, as you prognosticate for us a little bit, again you have argued on behalf of the First Amendment, and there is at the Yale Law School the Floyd Abrams Institute for Freedom of Expression. I'm curious, as you look down the road the next several years, do you see a bright future, so to speak, and a new appreciation for the First Amendment, or is it something now that feels like maybe like a premature baby you need to nurse and watch over very, very carefully?
Oh, you couldn't have put it better. I think we need a lot of nursing, and we need a lot of reading of books about nursing before we can be comfortable. I do think one very affirmative thing has happened in the last 20, 30 years on the Supreme Court, and that is that liberal and conservative members of the court have, as a general matter, and very often together, and very often without many dissenting opinions, supported a very broad reading of the First Amendment. That was not always the case, but it has become the case, and so we, in a way, we've become more different than other countries because we really, as a legal matter, give a very, very great deal of protection. The question is, as a real life matter, but most of things don't go to court. Are we letting people have their say? Are we letting dissenters speak out? In general, I think we've done well on that, but we need a lot of nursing to make sure that continues and that it's not overcome by the fiery, incendiary political divisions that we have in this country.
Well, the work, again, an important work in my opinion, called The Soul of the First Amendment by Floyd Abrams, one of America's preeminent authorities, not only on the First Amendment, but also defending it at high levels, including the Supreme Court on several occasions. Floyd, how can people find out more, not only about the work that you do kind of on a daily basis, but also pick up a copy of the book?
Well, they can pick it up via Amazon or any of the general outlets which are available selling it, and I hope some of your listeners will have a look.
And again, you're going to be in the Kansas City area. Are your appearances, are those all private, or is it possible that someone from the public can go?
I think people could find a way in. I'll be speaking, I think, in Overland Park, but that'll be in November.
Okay.
So hopefully that's November 9th and 10th, and I hope around that time some word will get around through the state, so maybe some people who might not have known about it can attend as well.
Well, we appreciate having you on. Thanks for the work that you do, and again, best of luck. I would love to have you on again sometime in the future for sure.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you.
You bet.
Bye-bye.
We'll be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.